Welcome back to Clear Record, where we cut through the noise and give you exactly that. Now, there's been a lot of talk lately about whether we're approaching the end of the war in Iran. And honestly, it depends entirely on who you ask. Some people will tell you we're close to a resolution. Others will tell you we're nowhere near it. But what's clear is that something isn't adding up. And today, we're going to get into exactly what that is. In this clip, we're going to hear from Professor John Mearsheimer, one of the world's most respected international relations scholars and a long-standing critic of U.S.-Israel foreign policy, as he breaks down the core problem Donald Trump is facing in trying to end this war and lays out his assessment of how he actually sees this thing concluding. This is a perspective worth paying close attention to. As always, we're going to watch the clip in full first. I'll hold my thoughts and commentary for the end, so stay with me.
Joining me with his perspective is international relations scholar, Professor John Mearsheimer. Professor Mearsheimer, welcome back to Uncensored.
Thank you, Piers. I'm glad to be here.
How does this all end?
Well, hopefully we'll get some sort of negotiated settlement. It's not clear we're going to get it, though. I mean, at this point in time, we don't even have a ceasefire. It looked for a while like we had a ceasefire. But that's broken down because the Americans decided they were going to continue to blockade the Strait, which is in effect blockading Iran. And the Iranians, who had opened the Strait for one day, reclosed it. And now we have a situation where both sides are seizing cargo ships or oil tankers in a tit-for-tat war. And we haven't even gotten back to the negotiating table. Hopefully that will happen. But I would argue, Piers, even when we get back to the negotiating table, working out a deal is going to be extremely difficult because the two sides are so far apart.
Right, and the crux of it is that after a number of different aspirations that were espoused by the Americans at the start of the war, including regime change and so on, they seem to have centered now the Trump administration on we have to stop Iran developing a nuclear weapon as the purpose for the war, which means that the victory can only be achieved if that is established. And you can only establish that, it seems to me, if you can be seen to have provably destroyed or have surrendered Iran's enriched uranium. If you don't get that result, I don't see how you can claim to have stopped them developing a nuclear weapon should they seek to do so.
I think what you say is correct. There are two issues here, as you pointed out. One is eliminating nuclear enrichment capability altogether. And number two, getting the uranium that has been enriched up to 60% out of Iran. Those are going to be two extremely difficult tasks to do. I think they may be able to cut a deal where that 60% enriched uranium is moved out of Iran. But Iran is not going to give up its nuclear enrichment capability. And just to take this a step further, Piers, it's very important to understand that the nuclear enrichment issue is only one issue on the table. There's the whole question of sanctions, the question of reparations, the question of who's going to control the Strait of Hormuz in the future, and whether the Iranians are going to be allowed to have a toll booth in the middle of it. There's the whole question of what is the relationship between Iran and Hezbollah, Iran and Hamas. There's the whole question of American military bases in the region. I could go on and on. There are just a lot of issues that have to be settled if you can settle the nuclear enrichment issue, which is a difficult issue by itself.
Do you think the Americans have underestimated in a massive way the Iranian ability to control the Strait of Hormuz and their willingness to attack the Gulf state neighbors? Because it seems to me the double-pronged way they've gone about both of those things has been a very effective response to the military attack, in which they clearly faced overwhelming military superiority from the Americans and Israelis.
I think there's no question that President Trump and the Israelis, and here we're talking mainly about Prime Minister Netanyahu and the head of Mossad, David Barnea, who was a central figure in selling this strategy to both Netanyahu and Trump. As far as they're concerned, they completely misread the situation. They thought that the United States and Israel acting together could produce a quick and decisive victory. They thought that we could launch a shock and awe campaign, decapitate the regime, and we wouldn't even have to worry about the straits being shut down. Of course, that didn't happen. But it's very important to emphasize that if you look at what Trump's advisors were saying, people like Vance, people like Rubio, people like John Ratcliffe, who's the head of the CIA, General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was handpicked by President Trump, all four of those players, key players in the decision-making process, thought that this was not going to work. So it's really a case where President Trump and the Israelis on one side prevailed in the decision-making process, and we ended up in this disastrous war.
In terms of the economic and political issues for President Trump now, which he'll be weighing up, they talk about the economic damage that the blockade, for example, is causing the Iranians, but it's also, of course, causing, the longer the Strait of Hormuz remains pretty well closed, massive economic issues, not just for America, but for everyone that uses that strait. But the political damage of the rising gas prices, rising energy prices generally, also the more slow-burning rise in food prices because the fertilizer couldn't get through either. All this is politically very toxic for Donald Trump, isn't it? I mean, the polling already shows his approval rating hitting new lows. The number of Americans that oppose this war is rising. Those two numbers will only get worse for him as this goes on. And then he's got the midterms coming in November. What do you feel about the political fallout from this?
I think you're absolutely right that the economy is of central importance here. And the economy, the international economy, is in deep trouble. If things get worse, President Trump will be in even more trouble. And I think this is the principal reason that he decided to extend the ceasefire yesterday instead of going back to bombing Iran. President Trump understands full well that if he bombs Iran, Iran will retaliate by completely closing the Strait of Hormuz and shutting down the Red Sea as well. And this will have even further devastating consequences on the international economy. In fact, lots of people are arguing that we're in danger of moving into a world that looks like the Great Depression of the 1930s. So President Trump has a vested interest in settling this war as quickly as possible. In fact, if anything, he wanted to settle it yesterday, and that's why he extended the ceasefire. But the problem is he has no military option. He can't solve the problem with military force.
Yeah, that is what's so fascinating about how this war has played out. I also think that for all the bellicose rhetoric he has about we're going to take out all the power plants in Iran and so on and so on, the truth about that, the cold hard reality, is that Iran still maintains a huge number of ballistic missiles, and they could easily attack, as they've already shown a propensity to do, the oil refineries of the Gulf state neighbors. And they could go further, and if their own desalination plants get taken out in Iran, they could do the same to the Middle Eastern Gulf state neighbors. And if they did that, they could basically stop water supply in some of those states. I mean, it could be really incredibly serious, almost borderline apocalyptic for the people in those countries.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. They can basically destroy all 6 of the Gulf states because they have the missile capability to do that. And again, as I said, they can shut down the Red Sea. You want to understand that a lot of Saudi oil is still getting out because the Saudis have built a pipeline away from the Persian Gulf toward the Red Sea. So Saudi oil is coming out through the Red Sea. If they shut down the Red Sea and that Saudi oil does not come out, and they shut down the Strait of Hormuz, and no oil, no fertilizer, no aluminum, no helium comes out of the Gulf, this will have devastating consequences for the international economy. And at the same time, you want to understand that if we do use military force against Iran, not only are they going to retaliate, but they're not going to throw up their hands and surrender. The Iranians are nationalistic to the core, and furthermore, they view the United States and Israel as an existential threat, and that means they'll fight to the last person before they surrender. So we have no war-winning strategy, and we have a powerful imperative to just shut this one down as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I said the same thing on Fox last night on the Five. I just think Donald Trump should get out of this as best he can, as fast as he possibly can. I see no longer term way that this doesn't get a lot worse. Professor Mearsheimer, great to have you back. Thank you very much.
So let's talk about what we just heard. I make a point of following Professor Mearsheimer closely. I've been going through his recent appearances across YouTube, and the reason is simple. When you have someone operating at that level, an international relations scholar with decades of expertise and a consistent track record of critically analyzing U.S. and Israeli foreign policy, and his analysis lines up with what we're actually seeing play out on the ground, that's not something you dismiss. That carries weight. And what Mearsheimer is describing is this. Donald Trump is in serious trouble when it comes to ending this war. You can see it even in Trump's own public rhetoric. There's no clean exit. There's no clear victory to point to. And the situation keeps getting more complicated, not less. Which brings me to the question I think we all need to be asking. Not just about the policy, but about the man making the decisions. Because here's what the reporting tells us. Trump did not walk into this war without warning. According to Mearsheimer, 4 of his own senior figures, J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, all handpicked by Trump himself, told him privately that this strategy would not work. Every single one of them. And Trump ignored all of them. Instead, he sided with Benjamin Netanyahu and Mossad Director David Barnea, who sold him on the idea that a swift shock and awe campaign would decapitate the Iranian regime before the Strait of Hormuz could even become a factor. That didn't happen. And now, here we are. I've brought this up before on this channel, and I want to revisit it. Take this as a theory. I'm not stating it as fact. But think about this. Donald Trump received an enormous amount of financial support from Miriam Adelson, one of the most prominent pro-Israel donors in American political history. Now, I'm not saying that's the reason we're in this war, but I am saying it's worth thinking about. Because this is a man who ran on no new wars, a man who ran on America first. Those were the promises he made directly to his base, the people who voted for him, who believed in that message. And what we are watching right now is a complete 180 from everything he told them. That's not a minor policy shift. That's a fundamental contradiction. For a man to go that far against his own base, against his own cabinet's advice, and continue doubling down regardless, something else has to be driving that. Whether it was a prior commitment to Netanyahu, to pro-Israel political interests, or something else entirely, I'll leave that for you to decide. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to know where you stand on this. What I will say with confidence is this. Donald Trump is backed into a corner, and right now there is no visible way out. And here's the part that I think gets overlooked in a lot of these conversations. Everyone going into this assumed that because the United States holds overwhelming conventional military superiority over Iran, this would be resolved on military terms. But Iran was never going to fight that battle. They're too smart for that. Instead, Iran shifted the entire conflict to the economic domain, closing the Strait of Hormuz, seizing oil tankers, threatening Gulf state infrastructure, and in doing so, holding the global economy at risk. Mearsheimer makes this point clearly. If Iran shuts down both the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea simultaneously, we're talking about oil, fertilizer, aluminum, and helium all grinding to a halt. Economists are already drawing comparisons to the conditions of the 1930s Great Depression. That is the leverage Iran is sitting on. And beyond the economics, Iran is winning the perception war too. Country after country around the world is watching this unfold and pulling away from the United States and Israel. That global reputational damage is real and it's compounding. It is working. So that's where we are. A war that Trump's own advisor said wouldn't work, launched on the advice of Netanyahu and Barnea, with no military solution available. A stalled negotiation involving nuclear enrichment, sanctions, reparations, control of the Strait, Iranian proxies, and American military bases, and a global economy increasingly under strain. That's the reality Professor Mearsheimer laid out, and it's hard to argue with any of it. As always, let me know your thoughts on this one in the comments below. If this video gave you something to think about, hit the thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already, turn on the bell so you don't miss what's coming next, and share it if you think someone needs to see this. This is Clear Record. Appreciate you all. See you in the next one.